My name is Madeline Hartwell. I'm 31 years old, and until recently, I believed that family, even with all its complications, was something sacred. I was wrong. When I opened my banking app after my brother Ethan's wedding, I expected a low balance. I had spent months funneling money into the event. But what I found wasn't just low, it was catastrophic. An additional $8,400 was gone, withdrawn during the reception. I froze. My hands, still stiff from stress, trembled as I stared at the numbers. And when I confronted my mother, Diana, the woman who raised me with designer dinners and silent expectations, she laughed. Actually laughed. "You can't do anything about it," she said with a tilt of her head, like she was reminding me of my place. That moment broke something in me. I reached into my handbag without a word, fingers brushing against the envelope I had prepared the night before. Calmly, I looked her in the eye and said, "Don't worry about what happens next. But let's rewind. I grew up in Boston's most refined zip code, in a 5-bedroom colonial where every room looked like a spread from a luxury home catalog. My father, Richard Hartwell, ran a booming real estate development firm with decades of influence tucked into every corner of the city. My mother? The true CEO of our lives. From perfectly tied napkins to tightly controlled dinner conversation, nothing escaped her grasp. And in the Hartwell household, order meant hierarchy. Ethan, my younger brother, was the chosen one. Me? I was the spare. The accessory. The girl meant to smile, serve, and stand still. Ethan was always destined for the family business. From the day he could spell condominium, my parents were already grooming him to inherit everything. I, on the other hand, was gently nudged into a more feminine role. Marry someone respectable, host elegant dinners, my mother once told me, like it was a privilege. I was sent to Northeastern University to study business, but not to lead, never to lead. Just to support. To learn how to make herself useful. After graduating, I dutifully joined Hartwell Properties in the marketing department. It was supposed to be temporary. It lasted 3 painful years. Every suggestion I made was met with raised eyebrows or thinly veiled condescension. My father would dismiss my proposals in front of the entire team. "You're thinking too small," he'd say. "That's not how we do things here." It didn't matter how well-researched I was. I was his daughter, not his colleague. My presence was tolerated, not valued. When I finally handed in my resignation letter, my mother didn't speak to me for a week. When she eventually did, it was to belittle my decision. Marketing events? That's not a real career, Madeline. It's a glorified hobby. My father was more blunt. "You're walking away from an empire." But I walked anyway. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, far from the gleaming facades of my childhood, and started from zero. I had no clients, no steady income, just a laptop, a phone, and a fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. I worked 16-hour days, accepted small gigs, and built my reputation brick by brick. I slept little, ate worse, and poured everything into this life I was building, one they said would never succeed, and then I succeeded. 3 years later, I was one of Boston's go-to event planners for corporate functions and boutique weddings. I knew how to stretch budgets, negotiate vendor discounts, and deliver perfection. I wasn't making millions, but I was proud. Independent. Free. Meanwhile, Ethan was gliding through life on a silk runway. He coasted through college, through wild parties funded by my parents, and landed a cushy title at Hartwell Properties the minute he walked off campus. When he met Jessica Barnes, a woman so polished she made Tiffany diamonds look dull, my parents practically threw a parade. Her family owned a chain of upscale hotels. The marriage, was an ideal alliance. Jessica was elegant, ambitious, and laser-focused on her vision of luxury. She and my mother bonded immediately over champagne preferences and custom embroidery. I, of course, was given a supporting role, again. When the engagement was announced just 8 months into their relationship, my parents transformed into event managers overnight. "We're thinking of hosting at the Langham," my mother mused one evening, swirling her wine glass. "The ballroom holds 300. 300? I echoed, nearly choking on my water. I thought this was going to be intimate. Jessica smiled sweetly, like I was a child who'd misunderstood something basic. "This is Ethan's only wedding. I want it to be unforgettable." My father nodded. "We've got the venue, catering, and honeymoon covered," he said. Jessica's father added, "Her dress and our contribution to the guest accommodations are also settled." Then came that look from Diana that always preceded a favor. Disguised as a command. "Madeline, with your connections in the events industry, you could assist with flowers and maybe the photography," she said, like it was a suggestion. It wasn't. Before I could reply, the conversation moved on. By dessert, I had been assigned multiple tasks with zero clarity, zero budget, and predictably, zero gratitude. At first, I tried to be supportive. I convinced myself this was a way to reconnect. To be included. Maybe, finally, I could earn some recognition for my skills. That optimism didn't last long. My inbox was soon flooded with emails from my mother containing Pinterest links. Jessica sent spreadsheets with floral inspirations from Tuscany and catering suggestions from Michelin-starred chefs, each item more expensive than the last. I tried setting boundaries. I reminded them of costs. But each concern was met with the same guilt-laced rhetoric: "It's your brother's big day, Madeline. Don't be selfish." So, I dipped into my savings, what began as small contributions, a $500 deposit here, a $1,200 payment there, quickly escalated. In 6 weeks, I had spent over $10,000. The dream of purchasing a condo evaporated with every receipt I filed away in a folder labeled Ethan and Jessica, Wedding. A label that, in retrospect, might as well have read Madeline's Financial Breakdown. Still, I pushed forward. Late nights turned into early mornings. I met florists, negotiated contracts, confirmed schedules. But no matter how much I did, it was never enough. My mother criticized my taste. Jessica rolled her eyes at my budget-friendly suggestions. And Ethan? He was barely present. The groom-to-be was too busy enjoying his final days of bachelorhood to care about who was footing the bill for his fantasy celebration, and then came the moment that changed everything. During a planning meeting, my mother casually mentioned that the venue deposit, $6,000, needed to be paid by Friday. I looked up, confused. I thought Dad was handling the venue. "He's tied up with that Cambridge property," she said quickly. "Unfortunate timing." "And?" I asked. "It would be helpful if you could cover the deposit for now. We'll reimburse you." That last line echoed in my mind for days. I knew what it meant. I'd heard it before. They weren't going to reimburse anything. And yet, I did it anyway, because deep down, a part of me still hoped, desperately, that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe they'd finally value me not just as a planner, not as a backup, but as a daughter. I couldn't have been more wrong. What followed were the most exhausting weeks of my life, both financially and emotionally. Every time I thought I had reached my limit, another message arrived. Another demand. Another, tiny, adjustment to the plan that somehow came with a hefty price tag. The floral arrangements became a battleground. I had originally proposed elegant, seasonal centerpieces, tasteful, budget-conscious, and still stunning. But during one of our planning meetings at my parents' home, Jessica turned to me with a picture on her phone. "Wouldn't it be magical to have floating orchid garlands suspended over each table?" she asked, voice dripping with excitement. My mother nodded enthusiastically. "It's visually impactful. Guests will be talking about it for years." I tried to smile, even as my stomach tightened. That installation, featured on some influencer's $1,000,000 wedding board, would triple the original floral cost. "I can get quotes," I said carefully, flipping open my binder. "But we're talking thousands above the agreed amount." Jessica's expression dropped into a pout. "It's really important to me and Ethan." I glanced toward my brother, hoping for backup. He was nowhere to be found. That was the pattern. Ethan avoided involvement. Jessica and my mother controlled the narrative. And I became the unofficial financier, organizer, and emotional punching bag. Whenever I raised concerns, Diana would respond with some variation of, "It's just money, Madeline. Weddings are expensive." As if that justified treating my bank account like a communal fund. 1 week, I covered the florist's retainer. The next, it was the upgraded linens Jessica insisted matched her theme more precisely. Then came the imported candles, the bespoke guestbook, and a late addition to the cocktail hour, a custom ice sculpture shaped like intertwined initials. I hadn't even known those existed. When I brought up budgetary boundaries again, my mother gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "No one likes a martyr." The worst part? I still believed I was doing the right thing. Late at night, I told myself this was temporary. That once the wedding was over, things would reset. That my parents would finally appreciate me, that my efforts would be acknowledged, that maybe, just maybe, I'd feel like more than an extra in my own family story. I started taking extra jobs to cover the costs. My evenings disappeared into fundraisers, anniversary celebrations, even a chaotic quinceañera with last-minute venue changes. I barely slept. My phone became an extension of my hand. My apartment looked like a supply closet, boxes of candles, fabric samples, guest favors stacked higher than my couch. I stopped dating. I skipped dinners with friends. Every moment not spent working was swallowed by wedding logistics. Only Lauren, my best friend since college, noticed the change. We met at our favorite cafe one morning after a sleepless night, organizing centerpieces. She looked me over, the circles under my eyes, the fatigue in my voice, and said, "You're running yourself into the ground." I stirred my coffee in silence. "They're draining you," she said flatly. "And they don't care." "They do," I replied automatically, though my voice faltered. "They just show it differently." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "By emptying your savings account and criticizing every choice you make." I couldn't argue. I didn't even try. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by receipts, contracts, and bank statements. I totaled everything. $21,786. My chest tightened. My eyes burned. I stared at the number for a long time, hoping it would magically change. It didn't. With shaking fingers, I initiated yet another transfer, from my already emptied emergency fund to the florist, this time for that over-the-top suspended orchid setup Jessica had demanded. The money wasn't just a number. It represented my future, my independence. Years of careful saving gone in service of someone else's fairy tale, and they didn't even thank me. The night before the wedding, I was still at the Langham past midnight, directing the lighting crew, adjusting the seating layout, solving a missing linen crisis, and coordinating vendor deliveries. The staff practically knew me by name at that point. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't forget Jessica's mom's breakfast, gluten-free, 7 a.m. sharp." "No thank you. No good night." Just a reminder. I was so tired I could barely stand. My back ached. My eyelids felt like sandpaper. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. I looked around the ballroom, half-decorated, slightly chaotic, and for the first time since this all began, I asked myself, what am I doing? Why am I the only one who's bled for this? I had no answer. The morning of the wedding, I was out the door before sunrise. I picked up the custom breakfast. I delivered welcome bags. I confirmed vendor arrivals. I fielded panicked calls about missing hairstylists and forgotten cufflinks. All while still wearing my jeans and hoodie, no makeup, hair tied up in a knot. I arrived at the ballroom to find the florists finishing the orchid installation. I stood beneath the garlands, thousands of delicate blooms cascading from the ceiling like snow, and felt absolutely nothing. No pride. No awe. Just a dull ache behind my eyes. My mother greeted me with her usual grace. "There's a typo on the Henderson's place cards," she snapped as she approached. Completely unacceptable. No greeting. No gratitude. Just more complaints. I fixed the cards. I adjusted the lighting. I calmed Jessica when her makeup artist ran 15 minutes late. I found Ethan when he vanished for a quick drink with his groomsmen. I ushered elderly relatives to the shuttle. I coordinated with the band. I even helped patch a torn hem 5 minutes before the processional, and when it was time, I stood at the back of the historic church watching Jessica glide down the aisle. In couture, the room filled with candlelight and string music. It was stunning. A cinematic dream, and I felt invisible. As they exchanged vows, I searched my own heart. There was no bitterness, just exhaustion. I had given everything, and no one had noticed. No one had seen. At the reception, that reality solidified. I wasn't seated with the family or the bridal party. I wasn't acknowledged in any speech. Instead, I was assigned to a table near the service entrance, beside distant cousins and Jessica's old coworkers. As the waitstaff served salmon with risotto and $1.25 a plate garnishes, I watched my mother glide through the ballroom like a queen. Near the bar, I overheard her speaking with a cluster of her friends. "Everything came together flawlessly," she said, raising a glass. "The orchids were my idea. They're going to be featured in Boston weddings next month." My stomach turned. She hadn't paid for them. She hadn't sourced them. She hadn't even booked the vendor. But she took the credit with the ease of someone who'd never been challenged. My name wasn't mentioned. My role wasn't acknowledged. I stared down at my dinner and realized I had been nothing more than a silent investor. An unpaid coordinator. A glorified assistant. Later, as the band launched into a Bruno Mars cover and the dance floor filled with laughter, I slipped away to the nearest restroom. Inside the stall, with the sound of celebration muffled by tile and distance, I finally cried. I didn't sob. I didn't wail. I just sat there, forehead against the wall, as tears spilled freely. When I emerged, Lauren was waiting. "I've been looking for you," she said gently. "Are you all right?" I nodded, then shook my head. "No. I'm not." She handed me a tissue. "Then stop letting them do this to you." I met her eyes in the mirror. "You fulfilled your obligations," she said. "After today, you don't owe them anything." Her words stayed with me all evening, but nothing prepared me for what I'd discover next. The reception continued without me. Back in the glittering ballroom, the music thumped, champagne flowed, and guests danced beneath the thousands of orchids I'd paid for. But I couldn't rejoin them. Not yet. Not after what I'd just endured in that bathroom stall, half grieving, half waking up. I lingered in the hallway, my breath slowly steadying, my eyes red despite the cold water I had splashed on my face. That's when I noticed the small conference room down the corridor, the one the hotel had offered as a private suite for storing bridal party belongings and coordinating logistics. The door was ajar. Voices floated from inside. I recognized them instantly. My mother. My brother. I moved closer without thinking, stopping just before the opening. Their words were hushed but clear. It's already done, Diana was saying. Her tone was brisk, decisive. She'll never even notice. Silence followed. Then Ethan's voice, nervous, uncertain. I don't know, Mom. Maddie's already spent so much. Maybe we shouldn't. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. It's just sitting in her account doing nothing. This way, it benefits the whole family. Now get back to your wife before she starts asking questions. My heart slammed against my ribs. What had they done? What did she mean? She'll never notice. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound, and slipped around the corner. I didn't want to be seen. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront them. My mind raced as I returned to the ballroom, trying to act normal, pasting on a brittle smile when I re-entered the room, but everything felt different. Every compliment about the decor sounded like mockery. Every toast about family love felt like a lie. I danced once. I pretended to laugh at someone's joke. But the entire evening blurred into a haze of anxiety and suspicion. Something had happened. I just didn't know what. When the last guest departed and the venue crew began clearing centerpieces, I slipped away. No lingering. I drove back to my apartment in silence. Inside, I dropped my heels by the door and went straight for my laptop, adrenaline sharpening my every movement. I sat cross-legged on the floor, opened my bank account, and held my breath, and there it was. 9:17 p.m., exactly when I had been locked in that restroom stall having a breakdown. A transfer had been made from my savings, $8,400. Recipient Diana Hartwell. The description field chilled me to the bone. Wedding, honeymoon add-on. I stared at the screen, willing it to change. Hoping this was some glitch, some clerical error. I refreshed. I relogged in, same result. I checked my notifications. No alerts. No confirmations. No text asking for authorization. I hadn't touched my phone during that time. How? I grabbed the phone from my purse, hands trembling. Had it been left unattended? Yes. During dinner, I had tucked it into my clutch and left the entire thing under the head table while running around solving problems. Anyone could have accessed it, anyone with the passcode, but my app was fingerprint protected, or pinned. That's when the truth landed like a brick. My code, my 6-digit banking PIN, was Ethan's birthday. A date my mother would never forget. I'd chosen it years ago. It felt like protection then. Now it felt like a loaded weapon I'd handed to the wrong person. I dialed the bank immediately after. Pressing through menus and verifying my identity, I reached a representative. I need to report an unauthorized transaction, I said, voice taut with anger. They reviewed the account, then delivered the verdict. The transfer was completed. Using your mobile banking credentials. We'll begin an investigation, but because it was initiated via your device, we can't guarantee reimbursement. But I didn't authorize it. I wasn't even near my phone. Was the device in your possession at all times? No, I admitted softly. That sealed it. Their system had no red flags. Nothing to mark it as fraudulent. I ended the call and sat frozen for a long time. They stole from me. My own family, and worse, this hadn't been an accident, or even a miscommunication. I had heard the conversation with my own ears. Diana had planned this. She knew what she was doing. She felt entitled to it. And Ethan? Ethan had known, too. I texted Lauren. Me, they took it. They took my money. Lauren, what? Who? Me, my mother. During the wedding. $8,400. Lauren, oh my God. Maddie. Me, I need help, she called immediately. Through broken sentences and clenched teeth, I told her everything, what I saw, what I overheard, what I found in my account. By the end, my voice was hoarse. Raw. You need legal advice, Lauren said. Firmly. This is theft. Period. You need someone who can help you navigate this properly. I don't even know where to start. Start with Sophia. Of course. Sophia Green. Our mutual friend from college, now a rising star in family law. I reached out to her that night. By morning, she had responded. Coffee? My treat. Bring everything. I printed transaction records, screenshots, timelines, messages. I compiled a full list of wedding-related charges I had covered, from floral deposits to rented heaters. It was nauseating how long it was. That afternoon, we sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop, my stack of evidence laid out between us. Sophia flipped through it, her frown deepening with every page. This is blatant financial abuse, she said bluntly. Unauthorized transfer. Misrepresentation. Coercion. Possibly even digital fraud if she accessed your app without consent. But it's my mother. Sophia didn't flinch. That doesn't change the legality. She paused, sipped her tea, then asked, "What do you want?" I looked out the window. The sidewalk bustled with people who had no idea my world had just imploded. "I want acknowledgement," I said finally. "I want my money back. And I want them to know they can't treat me this way anymore." Sophia nodded slowly. "Then, we'll begin with a demand letter." We spent the next hour drafting it: specific amounts, detailed events, official warnings. If no resolution occurred within 48 hours, we'd file a police report. We'd pursue legal action. I also authorized her to retrieve security camera footage from the hotel. If Diana had entered that room during the reception, we'd have video proof. Before we parted, she handed me a folder. Inside, the letter, the police complaint form, and a copy of every document. "You're ready," she said. I clutched it too. My chest like armor. Tomorrow was the post-wedding brunch. A gathering of family, friends, and out-of-town guests. The final page in this story they had written without me, but I had rewritten the ending. Sunday morning dawned crisp and silent. Autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalks as if nothing had happened, as though the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. My apartment, normally a haven, felt like a courtroom waiting for trial. I dressed deliberately. No soft fabrics or pastel tones. Today wasn't for comfort, it was for confrontation. I chose navy slacks, a structured blazer, and black heels that clicked with authority. The folder Sophia had prepared was tucked into my tote bag like a weapon sheathed in leather. I paused at the mirror before leaving. "You are not the victim anymore," I whispered to my reflection. My parents' home looked just as it always had: elegant, symmetrical, detached from reality. The front lawn was still perfectly groomed. The door wreath featured tastefully arranged miniature pumpkins. Even the brass knocker gleamed. Picture perfect, if you ignored what lurked behind it. The housekeeper greeted me with the usual cool smile. "They're all in the sunroom, Miss Madeline." As I approached, I heard laughter and the clinking of glassware. I inhaled sharply and stepped inside. My mother sat at the center, as always, flawless, composed, entertaining. Jessica's parents with some story that included tasteful self-deprecation and polished wit. My father occupied the high-backed chair at the end, sipping coffee, skimming the Boston Globe. Ethan and Jessica were seated beside each other, appearing serene, as if nothing had unraveled beneath them. No one noticed me right away. Then Diana spotted me over her mimosa. "Madeline," she said, smiling brightly, "you're late." We were just about to begin. "I had a few things to handle," I replied coolly. "Banking matters." Her expression didn't change, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "Help yourself," she said, motioning to the spread. Smoked salmon, quiche, pastries. All your favorites. Favorites I hadn't tasted since college. I took a plate but didn't touch it. The conversation drifted toward the wedding, the elegance of the floral displays, the breathtaking ambience, the glowing compliments from guests. Jessica's parents were effusive in their praise. "The whole weekend felt like something out of a film," her father said warmly. "You two really went above and beyond." Diana beamed. "We spared no effort. Our only son, after all." And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. "Well," I said, placing my fork gently beside my untouched croissant, "speaking of effort, I noticed something strange in my bank records this morning." The mood shifted, subtle, but immediate. My father looked up. Ethan's hand froze mid-reach for his coffee. Jessica blinked. My mother's smile became brittle. "There was a transaction last night," I continued, locking eyes with her. "A withdrawal of $8,400 from my savings." Diana lifted her glass. "Darling, now probably isn't the time. The funds went directly to your account," I said, tone unwavering. Jessica's mother cleared her throat delicately. "Should we step out?" "No," I said, my voice clear and calm. "I think you should stay. You deserve to hear this." The sunlight streaming through the windows did nothing to soften the chill settling into the room. My mother set her mimosa down a little too firmly. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," I replied, pulling my phone from my bag. "Here's the transaction. Timestamped at 9:17 p.m. While I was in the bathroom crying." Diana scoffed. "Honestly, Madeline, if you're going to turn this into melodrama," I raised my hand. "Let me finish." I pulled out the folder and placed it on the table beside the fruit platter. "This contains a detailed breakdown of every wedding expense I personally funded. Every receipt. Every invoice. Every deduction from my personal savings account. There's also a letter drafted by legal counsel demanding immediate reimbursement." The room fell into stunned silence. My father reached for the folder, flipping through the pages with mounting concern. My mother's facade cracked, just slightly. "You're threatening legal action? Against your own family?" "No," I said, "I'm demanding accountability. And respect." Ethan spoke up for the first time. "Maddie, I didn't know. I swear." I didn't realize you were paying for. I heard both of you, I said flatly. In the office. She'll never even notice. That's what she said. And you said, she's already spent so much. So no, maybe you didn't approve it. But you knew. Jessica looked at Ethan. Sharply. You knew she paid for all of this? Ethan looked like a schoolboy caught cheating. I thought she wanted to help. Diana stood, her face tight. We were under pressure. The honeymoon editions didn't justify stealing, I interrupted. You accessed my phone. You used my banking credentials. That's theft. That's fraud. My mother's jaw locked. You would really involve the authorities? If you don't return the money within 48 hours, I said evenly, yes. I will. My father finally set the folder down. This is serious, he said quietly. Diana, she has everything documented. If this escalates, we're not just talking embarrassment. We're talking criminal charges. I took what I thought I was owed, she snapped. That moment cracked everything. Jessica gasped. Owed? You think you were owed thousands of dollars from your daughter's personal savings? I've spent decades sacrificing for this family. Diana snapped. And Madeline just hoards her money in that tiny apartment. It was for a down payment, I said, my voice rising now. For my own home. A home I might have owned by now if I hadn't paid for a wedding I wasn't even thanked for. Jessica looked stricken. I thought your business was sponsoring it. Your mother told me that. She said you offered to cover things to build your portfolio. I laughed, hollow and sharp. She told everyone that. Because she couldn't stomach admitting her daughter was the reason this wedding didn't fall apart. Jessica looked at Ethan. You never told me. He was speechless. Diana's voice was ice. You're making a scene. No, I said, standing now. I'm making a boundary. The weight of that sentence hit like thunder. You have 48 hours to return every cent, I continued, retrieving the folder. If you fail to comply, my attorney files the report. Police. Press. Investigators. I've already requested security footage from the Langham. I'll have video confirmation of who took my phone. My mother looked like she had swallowed glass. My father, usually composed, looked pale. Ethan stood, guilt written all over his face. Maddie, I'm sorry. Truly. We'll fix this. Jessica stood beside him. You deserve so much more than what you got. I didn't know, but I do now. And I won't be silent about it. I nodded once. This doesn't erase what happened, I said. But it's a start. Without another word, I turned and walked away, heels tapping like a gavel across the marble floor. As I stepped outside into the cool mid-morning breeze, a strange stillness wrapped around me. The kind that follows storms, heavy, raw, and eerily silent. The front door shut behind me, muffling the chaos still unfolding inside. Raised voices tangled with footsteps on hardwood. My father's steady baritone. Jessica's sharp indignation. Ethan trying to manage the fallout. I didn't wait to hear the resolution. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't chasing closure. I wasn't begging for peace. I had already taken it back. My car was parked under a maple tree whose branches drooped low with crimson leaves. I reached for the door handle, but paused. From behind me came the sound of hurried footsteps. Maddie, wait. Ethan's voice. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't want to see guilt. Not again. But something in his tone, soft, unfamiliar, made me glance over my shoulder. He approached slowly, hands open, like he was trying not to spook a wild animal. Maybe he was. Maybe I was finally unpredictable to them now. Please, he said, stopping a few feet away. I didn't know everything. But I know I should have. I crossed my arms. Would it have mattered? He winced. Honestly? Maybe not at first. But hearing it all laid out, seeing Jessica's face, it hit differently. I waited. I let Mom shape my perception of you, he admitted. She'd say you were overdramatic, selfish, difficult. I never questioned it because it was easier not to. That stung. But I appreciated the honesty. I never asked what you were paying for, he continued. I just assumed they had it covered. And when I found out about the transfer last night, you still didn't stop her. He nodded slowly. I was scared. That surprised me. Of what? Of her. Of the way she explodes when things don't go exactly her way. And of seeing the truth. We stood there in the driveway, beneath falling leaves and decades of unspoken resentment. I can't fix what happened, Ethan said, stepping closer. But I can start doing better. I studied his face. He looked different, less polished, more human. Tired. A man realizing that convenience had a cost. Before I could respond, the door flew open again. My mother. Red-faced, eyes blazing. Her pearls shifted as she stormed toward us. How dare you? She hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's name? Ethan stiffened. I held my ground. I revealed the truth, I replied. If that breaks your image, maybe it wasn't real to begin with. We gave you everything. She spat. Private school. Tuition. A place in the company. You gave me conditions, I cut in. Strings. Expectations. And when I didn't obey, you erased me. Her expression twisted, somewhere between disbelief and fury. You think this makes you powerful? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Behind her, Jessica had stepped outside too. She looked between the three of us, eyes burning. I've never been more embarrassed, she said to Diana. Lying to me about who paid for our wedding. Telling guests Maddie's company was sponsoring everything. Do you even hear yourself? Diana's mouth opened, but no defense came out. Jessica turned to me. You deserve transparency. Respect. A seat at the head table, figuratively and literally. I'm sorry. For the first time, I believed her. You lied to my wife, Ethan said, now facing our mother. To cover up your theft. And you expected us all to stay quiet. Diana's voice wavered. It was for the family. No, I replied coldly. It was for your control. She looked at my father then, who had now stepped outside too. He held the folder of receipts, letter, and documentation. His expression was unreadable. We'll transfer the full amount, he said finally, voice low. With interest. Diana turned to him in disbelief. You're just going to let her win? This isn't about winning, he said. It's about consequences. Her posture faltered. Her lip trembled. For a fleeting moment, I saw something rare, doubt. You'll have the money today, he added, turning to me. I nodded once. That's not the end, though. He waited. I'm not part of this system anymore. Not the hierarchy. Not the silence. I'm not going to sacrifice my identity so you can keep pretending we're perfect. Jessica stepped beside me again. You're not alone in that. The wind picked up, sweeping leaves into the air like confetti. But this celebration was mine. Quiet, overdue, hard-earned. Without another word, I got in my car, pulled out of the driveway, and didn't look back, not once. Later that evening, I stared at my account balance. There it was, not just the stolen funds, but every dollar I'd spent, returned with a cold digital note, transfer completed, memo, family reimbursement, $22,786. Plus a modest interest adjustment. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow, because the money was never the issue. The real theft had been trust. Years of it. And no transaction could undo that. The following week passed an uneasy quiet. No texts from my mother. One stiff email from my father. Several apologetic messages from Ethan. I ignored them at first. I wasn't ready. I needed distance, space to sort through the emotional wreckage. So much of my life had been built around trying to prove myself to them. Now that I had stopped, I felt disoriented. Like a dancer who finally left the stage mid-performance. Lauren insisted I see a therapist. You've been emotionally mugged, she said bluntly. You don't heal from that by scrolling Pinterest. She had a point. I booked an appointment. Dr. Bennett was calm, measured, and direct. In our first session, she said something that stuck with me. You didn't lose control, she said after I described the brunch. You reclaimed it. I cried harder than I expected to. Over the next few weeks, I unpacked more than financial wounds. I examined decades of passive insults, unspoken expectations, and the unrelenting pressure to earn affection. It's not about the wedding, Dr. Bennett said one day. It's about every moment that taught you your value depended on performance. She was right, and for the first time, I was done performing. Winter approached with a kind of quiet I hadn't experienced in years. Not the hollow silence of avoidance, but the calm that follows deliberate boundaries. The money had been returned. The confrontation had been survived. But the reconstruction of self, that took more work than I imagined. I spent more time in my apartment. My tiny, imperfect sanctuary. The living room still held stacks of unused wedding supplies, votive holders, ribbons, backup seating charts. I stared at them for a long time one evening, then donated every piece. It felt symbolic, like clearing remnants of a life I'd been forced to perform. I updated my website. Tightened my service menu. Raised my rates. I removed all wedding-related imagery and replaced it with event snapshots I was proud of, corporate galas, charity fundraisers, intimate anniversaries. Not a single photo from Ethan and Jessica's wedding made the cut. One morning, while working through invoices, my phone buzzed with a new message. Ethan, Jessica and I would love to have you over for dinner. No pressure. Just a thank you. And maybe a real conversation. I didn't answer right away. It took a full week for me to respond. When I finally agreed, I did so with clear conditions: an early evening, no surprises, and no apologies disguised as justifications. Their apartment was modest but warm. Not dripping in opulence like my parents' home, but full of soft lighting and thoughtful details. A woven throw over the couch. A framed photograph of their dog, now deceased. A half-burned candle labeled vanilla fig on the console. The meal was homemade. Pasta, salad, wine poured into mismatched glasses. Simple, real. Ethan sat across from me, visibly anxious. I've been reading a lot about family systems, he began. About favoritism. Enmeshment. All of it. I raised an eyebrow. Therapy? Jessica nodded. We've both started seeing someone. Separately, for now. But it's helped us understand how deeply this pattern runs. The word pattern rang loudly. Dr. Bennett had said something similar. Your childhood wasn't broken, it was rigged. Ethan exhaled slowly. I never questioned why Mom always praised me and dismissed you. I liked being the favorite. It made life easier. But I see now that I was complicit. That silence made me part of the problem. Jessica reached for his hand. He's not the same man who stood by and let you suffer. And I'm not the same woman who assumed you were just helping out for optics. I didn't know. But I should have asked. I didn't reply right away, because forgiveness, I'd learned, doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It emerges slowly, like a sunrise, revealing truth in stages. I appreciate the effort, I said finally. But I can't promise anything long-term. Ethan nodded. That's fair. What I didn't say, but felt deeply, was that this version of him, uncertain and honest, was someone I might be able to rebuild with. Eventually. A week later, another surprise. My phone rang. Diana, her name on the screen sent a cold knot through my chest. I let it go to voicemail. She tried again the next day. This time, I answered, hello. A pause, then, her voice, tentative, stripped of its usual sharpness. Your father and I have started family counseling. I blinked. You? What? A therapist, she said slowly. She recommended we each take accountability for how we contribute to toxicity. It's been difficult. I couldn't imagine my mother in a therapy office. It was like picturing her on a factory floor. Out of place. Uncomfortable. We're beginning to understand, she added, that we've created an atmosphere where you are valued only when convenient. I didn't say anything. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. But I do want a chance to earn trust again. We're willing to do the work, if you're open to trying. That word, earn, wasn't one she used lightly. I stayed quiet for a moment, then replied, trying is enough for now. We ended the call without warmth, but without hostility. And that, for us, was monumental. As Christmas approached, I received an invitation. Not from my mother. From my father. Christmas Eve dinner. Low-key. No overnight obligation. I almost didn't go, but curiosity, and perhaps cautious hope, won out. The house looked the same from the outside. Stone steps. Iron railings. Perfect symmetry. But inside, something had shifted. Jessica greeted me with a smile and a hug. Ethan handed me a mug of cider. My mother, to my shock, simply said, thank you for coming. No loaded glances. No veiled insults. Just civility. Dinner was calm. My father asked about my business. Jessica complimented my outfit. Ethan cleared plates and poured drinks. Even Diana held back commentary about the pie I brought, store-bought, unapologetically, and for the first time in years, I left their house without feeling drained. Driving home through quiet neighborhoods, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked steady. Grounded. Not victorious. Just whole. The healing hadn't come from their apologies. It had come from choosing myself. In January, I placed a down payment on a small condo near Harvard Square. Hardwood floors. Sunlight in the mornings. A kitchen that needed work but felt like mine. The first night I slept there, I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and watched the city lights through bare windows. I had finally built something of my own, and no one could take it from me. January turned into February, and the walls of my new condo slowly absorbed the energy of autonomy. The place was still sparsely furnished, just a bed, a desk, a dining table, but it echoed with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Control, not over anyone else, over myself. There were no pastel throw pillows placed to match someone else's taste. No silent judgments embedded in wallpaper choices. No hallway art meant to impress guests more than comfort residents. This space didn't require me to perform. It allowed me to exhale. Lauren visited one chilly Friday evening. Arms full of takeout and an overgrown pothose plant. You need some green in here, she said, setting the pot near the window. Helps with mental clarity. We ate Thai food on the floor, drinking rose from mismatched mugs, surrounded by empty moving boxes and the faint scent of paint. You really did it, she said, glancing around. I think I did, I whispered, almost afraid to say it too loudly. You could have folded, she said. So many people would have. But you didn't. Her eyes glistened, not with pity, but pride. I'm proud of you, she added. That phrase, so simple, yet so foreign, lodged itself somewhere between my ribs. Later that night, after she left, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, turning off lights one by one. I looked out at the city below, a swirl of taillights and shadows. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, not as the daughter who gave until empty, not as the planner who solved everyone's chaos, but as someone unrecognizable and finally okay with that. Dr. Bennett, during one of our weekly sessions, had asked, "What do you want relationships to look like from now on?" I had sat with that question longer than any other. Respectful, reciprocal, quietly powerful. That was my answer. The following weekend, I hosted my first dinner in the new condo. Nothing elaborate, just Lauren, two close friends, and a few candles. I cooked pasta, baked garlic bread, and laughed until my stomach hurt. No approval required. No hierarchy. No debt. They brought me housewarming gifts, scented soaps, kitchen towels, a framed quote that read, "You do not owe your healing to those who broke you." I hung it above my desk. A few days later, Jessica sent an email. No subject line. Just a message, "I want to apologize again, not for missing receipts, but for not seeing you sooner. I believed the story they told about you. I regret that. I hope this year brings you softness, not just strength." I stared at the words for a long time before responding, "Thank you. Softness is the goal." She replied with a heart emoji, small gestures, but meaningful ones. Meanwhile, Diana remained distant. Our only interaction came through my father, who continued attending therapy. He updated me occasionally, never pushing, just relaying. "Your mother's making progress," he'd write. Slowly, but honestly. I believed him, not enough to trust yet, but enough to listen. The holidays had been a test. Easter would be another. I told them I'd decide closer to the date. In truth, I wasn't sure if I'd go. Being physically present without sacrificing emotional safety was something I was still learning how to do. The old reflex, to protect them from discomfort, to shrink so they didn't have to, was hard to unlearn, but the silence from Diana wasn't bitter anymore. It was space. And I needed that. I'd spent most of my adult life trying to earn invitations to tables I now realized weren't worthy of me. Now, I built my own, and everyone at it brought their own chair. The more time passed, the clearer it became, I wasn't grieving a loss, I was shedding a weight. It wasn't that I missed the dynamic we once had. What I missed was the illusion I clung to for so long, that with enough sacrifice, I could buy belonging. Dr. Bennett put it best. "You were conditioned to confuse loyalty with silence." I sat with that sentence for days. It explained everything: why I tolerated years of condescension, why I spent my down payment without protest, why I cried in that hotel bathroom and still went back out to smile for photos. I wasn't weak. I was programmed. Breaking that programming required something harder than confrontation. It demanded I redefine what love looked like. Not as obligation, but as respect. One gray afternoon, I visited my grandmother's old nursing home. She had passed 3 years earlier, but they still remembered me, the granddaughter who always brought cinnamon muffins and helped set up Sunday bingo. I sat in the garden where we used to talk. She had been the only family member who never treated me like background noise. When I told her about my job change years ago, she'd said, "Good. No one thrives while being clipped." Her words returned now with piercing clarity. In her absence, I decided to honor her legacy. I launched a new branch of my business, a scholarship program for young women starting in hospitality or event coordination without connections or capital. The first recipient was a 22-year-old from Dorchester with more talent than access. We met for coffee. She cried when I handed her the acceptance letter. "I didn't think people like you saw people like me," she whispered. "I see you," I said. "Because I was you." That project became my anchor. A reminder that value doesn't come from pleasing others, it's something innate, waiting to be claimed. Ethan continued reaching out, occasional texts. The occasional meme. A photo of the puppy he and Jessica adopted, a clumsy golden retriever named Leo who, by all accounts, was a disaster with furniture. I didn't ignore him. I responded with measured warmth. Our conversations no longer carried the urgency of repair. Just a cautious curiosity about what might grow next. And then, in early March, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A handwritten card, from Diana. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise, elegant, borderline architectural. "Madeline, I've rewritten this a dozen times and still find myself unsure what to say. But here it is, I was wrong. Deeply. Consistently. Sometimes unforgivably, your bravery forced me to see a version of myself I've long ignored. I'm not asking for reconciliation, not yet, but I would like to meet you halfway. I'm attending therapy. I'm learning to listen. I hope someday you'll let me try again." Momi read it twice. Then once more. The lines between apology and defense were blurry, but something in the tone felt real. I didn't respond. Not yet. But I placed the card in my desk drawer, next to contracts and timelines. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetfulness. But it was something I hadn't expected, acknowledgement, the kind I had chased my entire life and finally received only after walking away. That was the most painful and empowering truth of all. By spring, the air in Cambridge smelled like possibilities. Tulips pushed through sidewalk planters. Coffee shops cracked their windows open. I swapped my heavy coat for a light jacket and started walking again, without destination or guilt. Every Thursday morning, I met Dr. Bennett for our session. She never congratulated me in grand ways, but her nods, her silence between my sentences, felt like awards. Progress wasn't a straight line, but mine was unmistakable. I don't hesitate anymore, I told her one day. When someone crosses a line, I don't internalize it. I call it out. She smiled. That's boundary fluency. I left that session and called a client who'd been dragging his feet on payments for weeks. My voice didn't shake. My tone didn't beg that he paid the invoice that afternoon. That weekend, I rebranded my website again. Not a redesign, but a shift in tone. No more corporate buzzwords. No more bending language to sound more palatable. Just authenticity, event strategy with dignity. No chaos. No compromises. Simple. Direct. Unapologetic. Lauren celebrated with me by organizing a rooftop picnic. Blankets, wine, fairy lights strung across the railings. She raised her glass in a toast. To women who set fires when they're told to stay quiet. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hummus. The people in my life now didn't want me silent. They didn't benefit from my invisibility. They clapped when I said no. They didn't flinch when I claimed space. I started journaling again, not just for therapy homework, but because I wanted to. I wrote about things I'd never said out loud. Moments from childhood that haunted me, the way my mother frowned when I wore anything too bold, how my father only looked proud during Ethan's milestones, the time I won a middle school essay contest and no one attended the ceremony. Writing those things didn't break me. It freed me. The stories had weight because I never gave them voice. Now they sat on paper, out of my body. Healing wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was cumulative. Some mornings, I simply made coffee without rushing to check my email. Some nights, I read fiction instead of productivity articles. Some afternoons, I ignored calls without apology. Small rebellions, stacked like bricks, building a fortress no one could enter without permission. And as I got stronger, the anger dulled. It didn't vanish, but it softened. I stopped fantasizing about revenge. I stopped needing my family to understand. I stopped explaining myself in my own mind. That was new. A peace arrived not through reconciliation, but through disinterest in earning anything from people who'd already shown their limits. That didn't mean I stopped loving them. It meant I stopped confusing love with endurance. April brought its own transformation. Buds turned into blossoms. Sidewalk cafes filled with chatter. And I, somehow, felt like I belonged in the rhythm of a world that once made me feel peripheral. I stopped checking my family group chat, not out of spite. Not out of anger, because I no longer needed to. Ethan still sent the occasional update, photos of Leo wearing ridiculous sweaters, voice notes about their cooking experiments, snapshots of weekend hikes. I replied sparingly, but warmly. His tone was lighter, his need for approval less desperate. Maybe, like me, he had begun to unlearn. One Saturday, we met for coffee at a quiet bookstore cafe. He arrived early, holding 2 lattes and a hesitant smile. I took the one labeled with my name and gestured toward the sunlit corner booth. He didn't waste time. I sold my car, he said, surprising me. You love that thing. I loved the status, he corrected. Didn't realize how much until Jessica called it a chrome insecurity. I chuckled. I'm learning, he added. Slowly. We talked for almost an hour. Not about the wedding. Not about our parents. Just about music, weekend plans, podcasts we both liked. It felt real. Equal. Before we parted, he handed me an envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter. Maddie, you didn't owe us your savings, your energy, or your silence. I'm sorry I stood by while you gave more than anyone should. I want to do better. I hope one day we can look back at that brunch not as the day everything broke, but the day we started rebuilding. Your brother, Ethan. I held the envelope carefully, as if it might disintegrate. I meant every word, he said quietly. I know, I replied. That night, I reread his letter twice, then placed it in the drawer beside my mother's card. 2 unlikely artifacts of growth. Not redemption, but movement. My father reached out the following week. A simple text, lunch sometime? Just you and me. I ignored it for 2 days, then said yes, with conditions. Neutral location. No business talk. No ambushes. We met at a small Italian bistro in Beacon Hill. He looked older than I remembered. Not in a way that implied age, but in a way that revealed effort, like he'd been carrying too much for too long and only recently began setting it down. He ordered sparkling water instead of wine. I noticed. I read through everything again, he said, referencing the folder I had handed him months earlier. Every receipt. Every note. It was thorough. I didn't want deniability, I said simply, you didn't leave room for it. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, just full. I should have protected you, he continued. From her? From all of it. You chose convenience, I replied, gently. Not confrontation. He nodded slowly. I did. And now? I'm learning that silence is its own kind of betrayal. I let that sit. I don't expect trust overnight, he added. But I'd like to rebuild. If you're open. I studied his face, creased, unsure, absent of ego. I'm open, I said. But I'm not flexible anymore. He smiled faintly. I wouldn't want you to be. We paid separately. Back in my condo that evening, I updated my vision board, not with magazine cutouts or travel goals, but words, discernment, balance, wholeness. I wasn't seeking reconciliation now. I was inviting only what aligned. No more rewriting myself to fit into rooms built to exclude me. By May, my calendar was full, but not with obligations disguised as expectations. Every event I coordinated came from mutual respect, clear communication, and fair compensation. There were no last-minute guilt trips. No shifting goalposts. No clients assuming I'd foot the bill. One Friday afternoon, I closed my laptop early and stepped onto my tiny balcony with a glass of iced tea. Below me, Cambridge bustled, students with backpacks, cyclists weaving through traffic, couples laughing at nothing, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt still, not paused. Not stuck, settled. The reflection in the window showed a woman with softer edges, but stronger bones. Someone who no longer negotiated her value. Someone who remembered who she was before she was told who she should become. I visited my grandmother's grave the following Sunday, fresh daisies in hand. The cemetery was quiet, birdsong weaving through branches. I knelt beside the headstone and placed the flowers in the small metal vase. I did it, I whispered. I told her everything, the confrontation, the reimbursement, the card from Diana, Ethan's letter, the scholarship, the apartment. I spoke like she was sitting beside me, nodding the way she always had, one hand folded over the other. I'm not angry anymore, I said softly. Not like I was. Because truthfully, the anger had melted into something else, clarity. The fire that once fueled my fury had burned away dead roots and revealed fertile ground. I wasn't starting over. I was continuing, this time without chains. Later that week, Dr. Bennett asked me what I feared most now. Regression, I admitted. Forgetting how far I've come. She smiled. Then keep something nearby to remind you. Not just of the pain, but the boundary you drew through it. That night, I printed out a photograph from the wedding, not the ceremony. Not the reception, the hallway, the door slightly ajar. The moment before I heard the truth. I framed it and placed it on my desk, not as a monument to betrayal, but as a symbol of awakening, because behind that door, everything shifted, not because they changed, because I did. Lauren came by the following weekend with baked goods and questions. How's your peace treaty with the Hartwells? I grinned. Under review. She snorted. Fair. Ethan's trying. Dad's listening. Mom's evolving? Lauren raised an eyebrow. Miracles do happen. I'm not building a new version of the old dynamic, I said. I'm designing something entirely different. And they're either in, or they're out. She raised her cookie in salute. Queen behavior. We sat in the sunroom I decorated with thrift store finds and plants I was finally keeping alive. There was no music playing. No noise at all, just the kind of silence that didn't demand anything from me. That kind of quiet had taken decades to find, and now that I had it, I guarded it like treasure. The last weekend of May, I stood in the center of my new kitchen surrounded by the scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls, my grandmother's recipe, tweaked for modern measurements but true to memory. The sunlight streaming through the window painted gold across the tile. I wasn't preparing for guests. I wasn't entertaining family. I baked for myself, because now, I did things that fed me first, before anyone else pulled up a chair. That morning, I wrote a letter, not to send. To release, dear younger me, you did everything right. You tried harder than you should have had to. You believed approval was currency. You gave more than anyone had a right to ask. I'm sorry no one told you earlier that you didn't need to earn love. That your softness was never the problem. That shrinking doesn't protect anyone, least of all, yourself, but I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. I folded the paper and slid it into a keepsake box. Not as an apology, but as a declaration. Later that day, I visited the scholarship recipient's graduation ceremony. She spotted me across the crowd and ran over, gown swishing, eyes wide. You came. Wouldn't have missed it, I said. Her mother took a picture of us together, arm in arm, two women from different chapters of the same story. We both knew what it felt like to be underestimated. We both knew the cost of silence. We both refused to keep paying. The ceremony was followed by cake, laughter, and parents shouting advice over jazz music. I left with my cheeks sore from smiling, not pretending. That evening, I returned to my condo and found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a photograph of my mother and me from years ago, back when I was 10, dressed as a fairy for a school recital. She'd braided my hair and pinned glittery wings to my back. On the back of the photo, she had written, "I didn't know how to love you the right way. I'm still learning." No signature. No promises, just that, and oddly, it was enough. For now. I didn't call. I didn't reply, but I placed the photo on my bookshelf. Not to forget, not to forgive prematurely, but to remind myself that people change when they're given consequences, not comfort. This version of Madeline, the woman who could frame her own narrative, wasn't born from compliance. She was built from fire, tears, firm decisions, and a voice reclaimed brick by brick. As summer approached, I finalized the launch of a new project, Boundary and Bloom, a mentorship retreat for women. Navigating familial guilt and professional growth. Not therapy, not life coaching. Just space. Real, unfiltered, generous space. I shared the mission statement on my website. You don't have to sever ties to build freedom. But you do have to stop handing over scissors. Within days, applications rolled in. Emails from women in Iowa, New York, Arizona, Seattle. Stories so familiar it felt like reading my own journal out loud, and I realized something. All of this, every wound, every invoice, every sleepless night, had given birth to something more than revenge. It gave me purpose, not reaction, intention, not erasure, redefinition. On the 1-year anniversary of Ethan's wedding, I took myself out for dinner. A quiet table for one. No toasts. No speeches. Just steak, red wine, and a lemon tart that arrived with a single candle the server lit without asking. I smiled, made a wish. Didn't tell anyone what it was, because this version of me, she didn't need witnesses. She already knew it was real. If this story felt familiar in ways you wish it didn't, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about choosing peace over approval and power over silence.